Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Capital Club, I want to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who is in the room today, and also the people who are watching us live. We have a very special guest today with us, Mr. Yuri Levine. Yuri is the face of Israeli startup world. Yuri is a serial entrepreneur. He's also the co-founder of Waze, which was the largest community-based traffic and navigation app, which was bought by Google in 2013 for a $1.1 billion. Yuri is also board member and investor for MoveIt, which was acquired by Intel in 2020 for $1 billion. So he's got a unique distinction of having two unicorns to his credit. Yuri is also a chairman, investor, and board member for various other startups, which are mostly trying to solve a inefficiency problem in the market. And they're trying to add value to the consumer by saving time and money, in the process empowering them. We also know Yuri has been a very prevalent public speaker. He is expert on entrepreneurship, mobility, startups. So may I request all of you to give a big round of applause and welcome Yuri. Welcome to Dubai, Yuri. Welcome to Capital Club.
Thank you.
I remember last week talking to you on Zoom, and you sounded very excited about this trip. I believe it's your first one to Dubai.
It's my first time here in Dubai, and it's absolutely amazing. It's,
Great.
It's really impressive how much was achieved in such a short period of time. And in that way, I would say it's similar to Israel. In a short period of time, many major achievements.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'll be starting some questions which are not related to startup, and then we'll go to the presentation where you can walk us through your journey of startup and all the stories. So I'm sure the Abraham Accord, which was recently signed by UAE and Israel, on the ground in UAE, there's a lot of excitement. There are a lot of government entities and private sectors trying to explore opportunity to do business with Israeli companies. I want to understand from you, is there a similar excitement on the ground? And are people looking at similar things from the other side as well?
So I think that, at the end of the day, you look at maybe the top 10 companies of the world today, right? And so you will see there Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Netflix and Facebook. And those were startups not that long time ago, right? And you realize that the entrepreneurs are the ones that are going to change the world, and in most cases going to make it a better place for all of us. And because of that, I think that we need to encourage more and more and more entrepreneurs as an ecosystem, as a set of beliefs that is going to say, okay, if we want to think of the future, if we want to bring a better futures, we don't need to do that ourselves. We need to simply bring more entrepreneurs and encourage and create the ecosystem that there will be more entrepreneurs that will do that for us.
Amazing. Great. Thank you. And in terms of your perspective on the startup ecosystem in Israel and what UAE is trying to do, because UAE has also been very active. We have a great ecosystem which is now looking at encouraging and providing support for the entrepreneurs. Do you see transfer of ideas and knowledge happening on that side? Is that part of your agenda as well?
It's part of the reason that I'm here is to basically say, okay, there is a lot of experience in building startups in Israel. What if we can bring this experience? What if we can bring this know-how, this methodology in that sense, and into this region, and expand the ecosystem that was already created here, and make it more impactful? I will feel really rewarded if I can help to make it happen.
Excellent. In fact, that leads me to my next question, that Israel seems to be a significant player in the startup, especially on the technology side. What's the secret to that?
So one of the critical secrets to it is actually experience, right? Time. And because the ecosystem in Israel is rather much older than it is here, right? And I recall that there was an excellent interview with a very successful CEO, and he was asked, okay, how you can become such a successful CEO? And he said 2 words: right decisions. And then the interviewer asked him, okay, but how do you know to make right decisions? He said, 1 word: experience. Okay, but how do you gain experience? 2 words: wrong decisions. At the end of the day, the and this is really important to remember, second-time entrepreneur has 5 times higher likelihood of becoming successful, regardless what happened on the first time.
Right.
And so this experience is critical. And in many cases, when you have younger entrepreneurs or less experienced entrepreneurs trying to build their own startup, they are going to make a lot of mistakes. Some of them I already made. Some of them we can as an ecosystem, we can show them how not to do them, and essentially increase the likelihood of being successful. And this is what I'm doing in Israel for my startups. And in my vision, this is something that hopefully we can do here to help the ecosystem here to become mature faster in that sense.
Thank you. I was talking to one of your colleagues, Ariel, and he mentioned that the fear of failure is very low among Israeli entrepreneurs. And what's your view on that?
So it is true, right? At the end of the day, think of a funnel. There will be 1,000 entrepreneurs to start with, and there are actually 10,000 people with ideas, and 1,000 of them will make the leap of faith in order to. And of them, there will be 150s that will be somewhat successful, and very few that will be extremely successful. That's the rule of large numbers, right? So in order to build an ecosystem, you need to simply have more entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs in general are people that their passion for the change is greater than the fear of failures and the alternative cost, right? And you need to teach that, because if people are afraid to fail, then in reality, they already failed. They're not going to try, right? Albert Einstein used to say that if you haven't failed, that's because you haven't tried anything new before. And if you're going to try new things, you will fail. And in particular, if we look at the future, we need to encourage people to fail. We need to encourage them to try more, because if you don't try, you're not going to make it.
Thank you. I'm sure there are many questions from the audience as well, but as the format evening today, Yuri has a presentation which he'll walk us through, and there are some exciting stories around that. So I would request you to take us through that, and then we will have the session open for Q&A from the audience. So over to you, Yuri.
Thank you. So what I will try to do this evening is take us through a startup journey, an entrepreneur's journey, and at the end of the day, in this journey, failure is one part of it, right? So many failures, or journey of failures. But at the end of the day, you'll see that some of the conclusions, some of the key takeaway are actually applicable to all the businesses in the world. So in general, I would say most of the startups started from a very strong emotion, right? You either run into something that you really like and you tell yourself, this is how things should be done. Or you run into something that you really hate and you tell yourself, wait a minute, I'm going to change that, right? I hate traffic jams, by the way, if you wonder, right? I'm in Tel Aviv, I'm actually using my bicycle because I hate traffic jams. And this evolved into building a passion, into something that you go to sleep at night and you dream about it, and you wake up in the morning, and until 1 second you tell yourself, this is it, I'm going to do that, right? And then you realize that this is going to be a roller coaster journey. There will be ups and downs. And look, I look at the people around here, and I realize that all of you have business experience, and all the businesses in the world have ups and downs, right? But the frequency of those when you build the startups are much higher. Could be a few times a day, right? I think that I owe the best quote to Ben Horowitz. Ben Horowitz used to be a CEO of a startup before he formed Andreessen Horowitz, the one of the most successful venture capital firm. And he was once asked whether or not he was sleeping well at night as a CEO of a startup. And he said, oh yeah, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. And this is the reality, right? By the way, it's in his book, this quote. But it is the reality, right? Now, for entrepreneurs, at the same time, I would say there is no doubt what's next. It's always the next startup. In most cases, if you would ask an entrepreneur, what are you going to do after this startup? They will tell you, I'm going to build another startup. Now, if you would ask them the more interesting question, the next startup of yours, what it's all about, they actually know. They actually know because they keep on dreaming and they keep on thinking of things. And even though that they're saying, okay, right now, this is what I'm doing. But after that, I'm going to build another one. So I want you to think of building a startup exactly like falling in love, right? There are many ideas that you think of, and eventually there is one idea that you tell yourself, this is what I'm going to build, right? You go to many dates, and eventually there is one date that you tell yourself, she is the one. Now, at the beginning, you only want to spend time with your date. You don't care about the rest of the world. You start to think about your new ventures from multiple perspectives. This is the problem I'm going to address. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow morning. This is the end game for me. This is the team that I'm going to bring along until you feel confident enough. And then you go and tell your friends, this is what I'm going to build. Now, the first reaction is always the same. This will never work, right? And by the way, these are the nice people. The lesser nicer people will tell you, this is the stupidest idea that I ever heard, right? You take your date for the first time to meet your friends and they're saying, she's not for you. This is where you disengage from your friends. So the good news is that you're actually in love and you don't listen to anyone else. The bad news is that you are in love and you don't listen to anyone else. Right? That's at the end of the day, you have to be in love in order to go into this journey. You have to feel so empowered from within that you would actually go into this journey, because otherwise it's a journey of failures. It's a very challenging journey, right? And the longest part of this journey is the one that says lack of traction. This is where you tried everything and nothing works, right? This is where you keep on trying different things and nothing works. I want you to imagine this period of time exactly like trying to cross the desert, right? And you know, Israel is also part of the Middle East. We also have desert. And when you walk on the desert, there's only sand around you, right? There's nothing else, right? You go to sleep at night. You wake up in the morning, still only sand around you. You walk all day, there is still only sand around you. You don't see that you're making progress, but you do. By the way, the most important thing if you're trying to cross the desert, don't change course. Keep on walking the same directions. Otherwise, you might be going in circles and then you will die. And it's a journey of failures, and this is critical to understand. It's critical to understand for two reasons. Number one, if you're not prepared for it, you will not have the perseverance to go through failures. And this is critical, right? The second part is that there is an immediate derivative of that. Wait a minute, if this is going to be a journey of failure, then in order to increase the likelihood of becoming successful, I need to make more attempts. And this is how the way to do that is simply fail fast. So you go into sometimes I would see, you know, companies coming with this is a roadmap. And I said, okay, what you meant to say is that this is the list of experiments that we're going to make, right? Because once something works, you don't care about the rest of the experiments, right? And if something doesn't work, you need to immediately move to the next one, the next one, the next one. And this is the reality. What happened is that the next experiment, you're 100% sure that it's going to work. You're 100% sure that this is it. And in most cases, it's not, right? And the day after, you need to tell yourself, okay, this one is not. The next one, that's for sure it's going to work. And even though that it still doesn't make any difference. You need to go with the conviction for each one of those experiments or each one of those steps or each one of those features or roadmap or whatever it is. And doesn't make any difference if this is in product market fit or in building a company or building business model. And if you fail fast, you simply increase the likelihood of becoming successful. The most important part of all the startups in the world, figuring out product market fit. If you don't figure out product market fit, you will die. As simple as that. If you figure out product market fit, you will be successful. Now, if turns out to be large market, then you'll be very successful. If turns out to be smaller market, then you will be somewhat successful. The graveyards of startups is full with companies that did not figure out product market fit. But here is the reality, what happens when you do figure out product market fit. So I want you for a second to think of all the applications that you're using on a regular basis on your smartphone, right? So Gmail, WhatsApp, Google, Uber, Kareem, whatever it is, right? And ask yourself, what is the difference between the application that I'm using today and the first time that you have used that? And the reality is that there is no difference. We search Google today the same way that we search Google for the first time that we have searched Google. We are watching Netflix today the same way that we watch Netflix for the first time. So once you figure out product market fit, you don't change that anymore because the value proposition all of a sudden become clear and crisp. And that you don't change. Now, the reality is that before we figure that out, it might be a very long and challenging journey, right? For Waze, we actually started in 2006 as we formed the concept in 2007. We started a company in 2008. We turns out to figure out product market fit only in 2011, maybe end of 2010, this is it. For Netflix, it was 10 years, right? Netflix, the way that we know it, started in 2008. But the company actually started in 1998, 10 years beforehand. Microsoft, it was 5 years. Google were struggling, right? So we have here a Google guy. I don't know if you know the history of the early days of Google. They were struggling to the level that they were unable to raise capital, right? And so they approached Yahoo, and you might correct me that it was not Yahoo, it was actually Excite at Home, but it doesn't make any difference. I know that it was, but then Excite at Home was actually acquired by Yahoo. So the story is that it's Yahoo. And they said, okay, Yahoo asked them, how much do you want? And they said, $2 million. $2 million, right? Not $2 billion, not $2 trillion, $2 million. And Yahoo said no. By the way, we look at it and say huge mistakes. We don't know that. We don't know what would have happened if they would have said yes, right? And so when we make a decision, we don't know what would have happened if we would choose a different path. And therefore, there are right decisions or no decisions. Because when we make a decision and we choose a path, this is it, right? We might want to change that later on, but we don't know what would have happened. So product market fit, the most critical part for all the startups. Now, for me, building a startup is easy, right? Start with the problem. Think of a problem, a big problem, something that is worth solving, something that the world will become a better place if we solve that. And then ask yourself, so who has this problem? Right? Now, if you happen to be the only person with this problem, then I would say, go to a shrink. It's much cheaper than building a startup. But if a lot of people actually have this problem, then I would say, okay, go and ask those people and understand their perception of the problem. And only then go and build the solution. If you follow this path and your solution works, which is a challenging journey by itself, then it's actually guaranteed that you create value. If you start with the solution, you might be building something that no one cares. And this is really frustrating. Building something, putting there a lot of efforts, a lot of time, and building something that no one cares, that's really frustrating. So start with the problem. Figure out a problem that you know that the world will become a better place if this problem disappears. And by the way, if you will figure out that there is a magical wand that makes this problem disappear, this is good. So these are, I would say, the key learnings that I had over the years of building startups, right? So who are your users and what is their perception of the problem? The second that you stop thinking of that, you're starting to build things that they don't care. And if you build things that they don't care, someone else is building things that they do care. Make your mistakes fast. We define that as the core essence of journey of failures, right? So if we make those mistakes faster and faster and faster, we actually increase the number of attempts that we have and therefore increase the likelihood of becoming successful. The biggest enemy of good enough is perfect. You don't need to be perfect in order to win the market. You will actually become perfect if you start with less than good enough, get the feedbacks from your users, become better and better and better until you cross the threshold of good enough, and you keep on doing that, right? This is how you become perfect. You don't build perfect from the beginning. You build something in order to start learning faster. The DNA and the mission at the end of the day define your journey. If you look, you start a new startup, right? You have an opportunity to define what do we stand for? What is the DNA of this company? Because all the companies in the world have a DNA, right? There will be one created, whether or not you like it or not. But it's your opportunity to actually say, this is what I care about. This is what we're trying to build. When we started Waze, we said, okay, Waze is going to be the best working place we ever had. And we defined that. What does it mean for us? How do we make decisions? What people are we going to bring on board and so forth? And it ended up that we actually lost about 4 people left in a 5 years journey. This is it. Because we care. And by the way, because they cared as well. Every recruit that we had, we actually had an interview with them saying, okay, do you sign up to this DNA? Because if you don't, you're not going to be successful here, and you don't want to be here, and we don't want you to be here. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Look, companies that claims ownership of the problem, they're in a much better position to become market leaders. But at the end of the day, you want to think of the problem every day. You want to write down at your office, this is the problem we are going to solve, right? And every day ask yourself, are we making progress in addressing this problem? The reality is that it makes your story more comprehensive, more appealing, and the focus, the effort of the company on solving the problem and nothing else. And this is in order to become successful, startup needs to do one thing right: address the problem. Now, the way to focus is actually not thinking about the problem, is basically saying everything else I'm not doing. Doesn't matter. Everything else I'm not doing. We could have built Waze for pedestrians, for bike riders, for skiers. I actually like to ski, right? For whatever you want. But we say no. We have one focus, and this is the commuter driver, the daily commuter. This is how they drive. We're going to serve them. This is it. Last one turns out to be very valuable. I learned that actually after the Waze period of time, when I started to speak with a lot of entrepreneurs, and many of them said, and I spoke with many entrepreneurs that their startup failed. And I asked them why. And about half said the team was not right. So I kept on asking, okay, what do you mean the team was not right? And so some of them said, okay, we had this guy not good enough, or this guy not good enough. So not good enough was one reason. Another reason that I heard multiple times was someone say that we had communication issues, right? So something that I actually called ego management issues, right? And then ask them the most interesting question: when did you know that the team is not right? All of them knew within the first month. All of them knew within the first month that the team is not right. There was one guy that told me before we even started. And so you said, okay, wait a minute. The problem was not that the team was not right. The problem was that the CEO did not make hard decisions. Making easy decisions is easy. Making hard decisions is hard. This is why no one likes to make hard decisions, right? In most small organizations, they will go all the way to the top, to the CEO. Now, if the team is not right, everyone knows that. Right? This is a small team. This is maybe 10, 15, 20 people. If there is someone that is way under deliver, or someone that is a complete jerk and no one wants to work with this guy, everyone knows that. Now, everyone knows CEO doesn't do anything. This is not good. There are actually only 2 options, right? Number 1, CEO doesn't know, which means that CEO is stupid. This is not good. Number 2, CEO does know and still doesn't do anything. That means that the CEO lacks the leadership of making hard decisions. The result, by the way, is always the same. The top performing people would leave. Now, they would leave because they have a choice. So a little bit about the Waze journey, and then maybe I would say, a recipe, but or a point of view of how to build a startup, right? So a startup strategy in that sense, right? So by the way, Waze is not extremely successful here in Dubai. It's actually pretty good. If you use Waze, it's probably better than Google Maps, but it's not extremely successful. It's not that I would be walking down the street and everyone is using Waze. And still, there are probably half of the population that are using Waze, so this is the order of magnitude. The magic of Waze is that everything that is being used by the application is being created by the drivers. So we, the drivers, are a social network of drivers, and we create all the content that is being used by the application, not just traffic information, the maps themselves. Now, if I will have a time machine and I will roll us back into 2007 and I will tell you this is what I'm going to build, most likely you will tell me this will never work. But let me take you through this chart. So the magic of Waze is that we, the drivers, creates the map, not just traffic information. That was the map of Tel Aviv when we started. Blank page. There was absolutely nothing on the map. And when the first driver drove, we collected the GPS data from the device. And if we draw this GPS data, this is what we're going to get. If we take it from a lot of drivers, we're starting to get something that looks like a map, right? If I will tell you that this is a traffic circle in the middle, it looks like a traffic circle, and it is a traffic circle. If I would ask you, can you tell the difference between a main road and a street? You can see the density and tell me, okay, over there it's a main road, and over there it's a small street, and so forth. If there is an intersection that no one is making left turn, then no left turn is allowed, as simple as that. If there is a road that there are 100 people going into one direction and no one else coming the other direction, that will be one-way street. Right? If there is a road that there are 100 people going into one direction and there are 2 coming the other direction, this is one-way street in Tel Aviv. Now, if you have computer science background, you would know that if I can describe something, we can build it. And this is exactly what we did. We created the server that takes all of this data and creates the map out of that. Now, initially, the map is incomplete, but then we enabled map editing tools that people can provide us with street names and house numbers and points of interest to make the map fairly complete. Now, at this phase, if we will have someone that is driving slow, then we can figure out that there is a traffic jam here. And if we have a lot of drivers all over, then we can figure out where all traffic jams are and essentially route people to avoid a traffic jam. So that was the promise of Waze. That was the mission of Waze. We're going to help the commuter drivers to avoid traffic jams. Now, is that really works? Let me see here. So in this video, we are about to see how the map was created in a few places in Eastern Europe. And you can see the date beginning of 2010. By the way, usually when I speak, I ask to have the presentation in front of me, that I don't need to look back. Now I just realized that I can see the reflection on the window over there, so I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for arranging the window over there. And it took about 6 months for the map to become good enough. Now, this is critical to remember. Waze is free and good enough. Win the market. Free and good enough wins the market. No one can compete with that. If you have Gmail, raise your hand. Right? Everyone has Gmail. Right? Gmail is exactly 16 years old. Before that, we actually used to pay in order to have a mailbox. The internet service providers provided us with access in mailbox, and we used to pay for that. And then Google introduced Gmail. That at the beginning it was not good enough, but after a few iterations, it became good enough and free. And this is it. End of story. No one can compete with free and good enough, right? If it's not good enough, it doesn't make any difference. Free and good enough is complete disruption to any market. No one can compete with. So a little bit about and again, if I would roll back the time machine and I will bring us back into 2007, and I will tell you, this is what I'm going to build, you'll tell me it will never work, because no one could have believed that we can actually pull that off. When we started, And I'm going to speak a little bit about this, but the first version of Waze was running on a PDA. Remember? A long time ago, there were dinosaurs, and then PDA, and then Nokia phones. And today we all have Android and iPhones, right? This long time ago is 12 years, right? This is it, 13 years. If I would have this time machine, and I will send you 13 years into 2007, that means that I'm going to take away your iPhone, WhatsApp, Waze, Kareem, Netflix, Google. Actually, Google, there was on the computer, right? But pretty much everything. Not sure that we will survive. The next generation is pretty clear that they will not survive. We roll out the first version in Tel Aviv in 2009, and it was actually pretty good at the beginning. Tel Aviv is a small place, and social net has high penetration of smartphones at the time, of Nokia phones and so forth. And it turns out to be pretty good. And we told ourselves, wait a minute, if this is created out of thin air, we can launch that everywhere, right? And so the end of 2009, beginning of 2010, we launched that globally. We basically say everyone in the world can download Waze and start using it. Remember this slide? It was not good enough. It was not good enough here. It was not good enough in the US. It was not good enough in Europe. It was actually good enough in 4 countries. This is it. In Czech Republic, Slovakia, Latvia, and Ecuador. And that's about it. And here is where you realize that it's not good enough, and you start a dialogue with the users, and they tell you what doesn't work for them. And so you build the next version, and you know that this is it. And you roll out the next version, and you're 100% sure that this is it, and it's not. And so you go and do another version of it. You listen to the drivers. They tell you what doesn't work for them. You fix everything that they told you. You roll out the next version, and you know that this is it, and it's not. Iteration after iteration after iteration until you become good enough. Now, sometimes what happens is that sometimes you make baby steps and you move forward a little bit. Sometimes you actually go backward, right? So it turns out that the next version is lesser than what's before. Sometimes you make leapfrogs, right? You make significant progress. Now, you don't know which one is which. Otherwise, you will do only the leapfrogs, right? You don't care about the rest. Every time that you go into the next iteration, you know that this is it. And this is the beauty of building a startup, is that every time there is the excitement of this is it. Now, we only figured that out at the end of 2010. And then we have seen that it's starting to happen in multiple places, right? If you look at the US, then that was Los Angeles first, and then San Francisco, and then New York, and Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, and Chicago, one metropolitan after that. Or if you think of Europe, that was Italy first, and then Netherlands, and France, and Spain, and Sweden, one country after that. If you think of many places, it was one after the other that it turns out to be pretty good. And once you reach the level of pretty good and free, you're not going to lose that. 2012, Waze was actually outgrowing the entire industry combined. So you take all navigation devices, all in-car navigation systems, all navigation apps, Waze was outgrowing all of them. And then in 2013, Google came with a proposal to acquire us, and we simply said yes. Now, that was actually a very swift deal, because Google sent the term sheet of one page and said, okay, we're going to close the deal in 7 days. It was actually 10 days. Very swift, very fast. People often ask me whether or not it was the right decision, or whether or not I could have sold Waze today for 10 times bigger amount. What we don't know is whether or not we would be gutting to become what it is today if we wouldn't have said no to Google at the time. When you make a decision, by definition, it is the right decision. So building a sort of strategy, and to a certain extent, I would say, look, it's like building a building, right? There is a recipe that you can follow. There is a practice that was built over time that you can actually engineer building a startup. Obviously, there will be so many questions along the way when you actually execute the plan. But the plan is actually pretty consistent. Building a unicorn is easy. All you have to do is simply align all those stars, right? So you need to align that the product is actually needed and being used, so you create value, product market fit, that the market is large enough, that the lifetime value, that you figure out a business model that makes sense and allow you to become profitable or successful company, that you figure out how do you become global leader, how do you actually gain users or maintain your growth significantly. And in many cases, you will see that most of them actually have a coolness factor or something that I call X factor. Now, the problem is that when you start your journey, all those stars are spread all over. And you actually need to figure them out one by one. And this is the key, one by one. You always start with product market fit. If you don't figure out product market fit, you will die. If you do, you actually buy yourself a ticket to the next part of the journey. Now, each one of these phases is 2 to 3 years if you are successful, and could be 5, 6, 7 years if you are unsuccessful and still struggling. So this is the first 7 years, as simple as that. First, product market fit. After that, by the way, most of the companies will try to figure out growth. And if they're unsuccessful in figuring out growth, they will try to figure out business model. Some will actually say, okay, you know what? I'm going to figure out business model beforehand. Some will actually be successful in figuring out growth. And then they will keep that for 2 or 3 years until they materialize the growth and control the growth. And then they will go into figuring out business model. When Waze was acquired, I think that the revenue run rate was less than $1 million a year. So no one acquired Waze for the amount of revenues that we have generated. Not for that. By the way, today, and again, I'm not 100% sure because I'm no longer there for 7 years. I left the day after the acquisition. But I think it's few hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm not sure. It's actually pretty good. It's pretty good as a profitable business. Now, each one of them is a journey of failures. Each one of them, you need to make your mistakes fast. Each one of them, and this is where it's becoming challenging, is a complete shift in the priorities of the company, right? If you're trying to figure out product market fit, you don't need sales. You don't need marketing. You don't need business development. You need product, and you need someone to run the show. This is it. You can be very lean in that and doing quick iterations. If you're trying to figure out growth, product is becoming much less important. Marketing become very, very important. If you try to figure out business model, sales become very important. By the way, in most cases, even what we've seen in the organization is that the R&D is keep on growing, but the product doesn't change. The back end of the product is being changed, right? So supporting more languages, more business models, more capabilities, more scale, and so forth requires a lot of engineering. But the product itself, the front end of the product doesn't change. So over the years, we have kind of built a method, I would say. And look, for all of my startups, there is a common philosophy of doing good and doing well, right? So it's always about solving problems. But there is a practice that we have developed over the years that turns out to essentially increase the likelihood of being successful. And this is the practice, 3 elements: the problem, the CEO, and the mentorship, the guidance that we provide in order to increase the likelihood of being successful. And in most cases, we have this problem that we think about for a longer period of time, and we are looking for the right CEO to execute. Sometimes it's sometimes they will come to us, the CEO will come to us with the problem that they are going to address. Sometimes it's the other way around. We will actually come to the CEO and say, whenever you're ready, we are ready to start. And we have plenty of problems. The good news is that there are many problems in the world. The bad news is that there are many problems in the world. So a few words about myself. You mentioned earlier that you want to see me with the T-shirt, fall in love with the problem. Then here it is. And here are some of my startups, right? And Waze, we know, move it like Waze, but for public transportation. Actually, it was acquired earlier this year by Intel for $1 billion. But essentially, when it started, it has the same vision. We're going to help people to save time when they travel on public transportation. Now, Move It was outgrowing Waze in terms of the number of users and the growth and so forth. And turns out to be a pretty amazing journey as well. There are a lot of similarities. When I try to compare exactly the time frame, right? And so I realized that, okay, at the age of 5, Waze had 50 million users, and so is Move It. Waze had 107 employees, and Move It had 106. Right? And so you realize that there is a sort of a consistency here, but also very important, you don't need large scales or organizations in order to build something valuable. You need to figure out how you can build it efficiently. C3, agriculture technology space, helping tree growers to increase the yield in their plantations. And what we have built is a system that we have drones flying over plantation of trees, and at the level of a single tree can tell the farmer if this tree is healthy or not, and if it's not, what is the issue. Now, the reality is that if you think of large plantations with millions or tens of or hundreds of millions of trees, then no one knows what's going on. Right? They might be complete areas with dead trees that you don't even know. And dead tree, if you think about it correctly, then it's a malfunction productivity unit. It does not produce. This is it. Now, the problem with trees is that they don't produce this year, but they're not producing next year and the year after that. And for the next 25 years, there is zero production. Fairflight deals with biggest secret in travel industry. Now, I know that nearly no one travels these days, but the biggest secret in travel industry, what happened to airfare after you book your flight? Now, the reality is that no one knows, right? Before we're making reservations, we notice that airfare is going up and down all the time, right? What happens to the airfare after we make the reservation? It still keeps going up and down the same way. So this is the price that you paid. This is cancellation fees. If prices are going up and down, every time that it's here, you're leaving money on the table. I don't like to leave money on the table. So what Fairflight does, monitor your own itinerary. And if the price drops, you can actually rebook the same flight at a cheaper price. Now, if you think of individuals, that's nice. If you think of corporations, Google with 120,000 people, we can save them 10% of their travel budget. That goes directly to the bottom line. This is actually quite a lot of money. Refund it again in travel industry. We don't travel that much anymore, but COVID will be over and we will be back in travel. If you travel to Europe and you buy goods, you're actually entitled to get the VAT back. Now, when you try to do that, it simply doesn't work. There is always bad things happen, right? So long lines at customs, or the stores don't have the right forms, or you go there to the airport and they tell you, of course, we have tax refund. It's in a different terminal, right? So something bad happens there. And we basically said, wait a minute, what if we simplify that? What if we really make it simple? And we built an app that all you have to do is scan the receipt, scan the boarding pass, scan your passport, get your money back, as simple as that. At the same time, we digitalized the entire process for the authorities. Because when I spoke with customs officers, I asked them, okay, so imagine 100 people in line. What is it that they buy? And they said, look, 95% we don't care. And I said, okay, now imagine that those 100 people, each one of them is raising the sign and says, okay, this is what I bought. This is how much VAT I'm claiming. This is how many times I was here this year. And this is whether or not I was ever rejected for VAT refund. Right? And you look around you and you see these 100 signs and you basically say, you with the experienced piece of art, come over here. You with the expensive jewelry, come over here. The rest you can go. Because this is exactly what we're doing for them. And I'm not going to go all over those. They're in different industries. They are in the each one of them is trying to address a single problem, but it's a problem that it's worthwhile to solve. So maybe one more question, one more story, and then we can go into the questions. And over the years, a lot of people came to me and say thank you for Waze. And by the way, this is the biggest reward for someone that is building consumer app, is that people are coming and say thank you. Then you know that you have created value. But a lot of people had their own stories. And one of the best stories that I heard was a few years back. Someone came to me and say, thank you, you saved my marriage. And I said, wow. I said, well, because of Waze, we don't argue anymore in the car. So you saved my marriage. So I ended up to be a marriage consultant. But I think I owe the best story to my son. And I have 5 kids, and one of them today is 22 years old. But when he started to drive some 5 years ago, he really likes to drive. He would drive anywhere. And so one day I asked him to drive me to the airport, and he said, my phone is broken, I can't. And I said, okay, what do you mean you can't? Here's the car, here are the keys, drive me to the airport. No, you don't understand, my phone is broken. I don't know how to get there. So I was scratching my head for a second, and I said, you know what? I'm going to be in the car with you, and I'll tell you how to get there. And then he asked me, and how would I come back? So we lose orientation, but not logic. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you. That was very enlightening. I like the slide where you said building a unicorn is very easy. Just align the stars.
As simple as that, right? Exactly.
Well, I have a few questions, but I want to also throw open the Q&A session for members. If you have anything, please go ahead.
So thank you so much. That was very entertaining and insightful. So, a lot of the story.